My name is Odessa Wren. I'm 38 years old, and this morning, as I refilled the orange juice pitcher at the Hadley family breakfast, my mother-in-law smiled sweetly and said, "Thanks, hun. You've always had such a servant's heart." I nodded, set the pitcher down, and walked away before anyone could see the look in my eyes. This wasn't the first time I'd been mistaken for staff. Not at this place. Every summer, Henry's family, well, his mother's side of the Hadleys, vacations at this exact lakeside resort in northern Montana. A place with 3 fireplaces in the main lodge, valet parking, and linens folded like swans. It's the kind of place that's proud of its exclusivity, a little too proud. The kind of place where old money likes to pretend the world hasn't changed. And every year, I've shown up like I always do. Quiet, presentable, neutral enough to blend in, invisible enough to be useful. And every year, someone mistakes me for the help. Never Lauren, Henry's sister. She knows exactly who I am. She just pretends not to. It's a game, I think. See how far they can push the line of disrespect without ever quite stepping over it. See if I'll break. I never do. I pour the juice. I pass the tray. I smile. I'm the accommodating one. The unthreatening one. That's how they've survived for generations, by pretending they don't see the weight of what they're saying. But this year, things are different. This year, the reason the private chef changed menus? That was me. The reason the valet no longer allows unregistered cars to skip the list? Me again. The reason the Hadleys aren't getting their usual founding guest discount? That would also be me. Because this year, I'm not just the quiet wife of Henry Hadley. I'm the majority owner of this resort. They just don't know it yet. Henry and I have been married for almost 12 years. He's a tenured professor of American literature, brilliant in theory, gentle by nature, and absolutely conflict avoidant. The kind of man who quotes Emerson at dinner but can't bring himself to speak up when his mother calls me practical. He loves me in his own quiet way. But he's never really defended me, not once. Not when his Aunt Helen joked that I must have learned to make cornbread on the job. Not when Lauren told me, at our own wedding, that the caterers matched my vibe. Not even when his mother, Vivian, introduced me to her bridge club as Henry's lovely wife from somewhere out west, I think. She works with trains or power lines or something. The room laughed lightly. I smiled. Henry said nothing. I've always worked, always built. I graduated with an engineering degree while working 2 part-time jobs. I paid off my loans on my own. I bought our first house with savings I didn't tell anyone I had. And while they posted ski trips and vineyard photos, I quietly put money into high-yield accounts and began learning about infrastructure investment. But I didn't talk about it, not to Henry, not to anyone. It wasn't secrecy, it was survival. Because in the Hadley world, quiet competence wasn't celebrated. It was ignored. If you didn't sparkle on cue or come from the right family, you were useful, not valuable. So I stayed useful. I helped set tables. I organized the holiday gift exchange. I designed the layout for Henry's father's retirement party, coordinated the vendors, even made sure the custom invitations matched the family crest. At the event, they thanked Henry's cousin Melissa for bringing such class, and the hired event planner for making it all work. They never mentioned me. Afterwards, Henry kissed my forehead and whispered, "You made this perfect." But he didn't say it out loud. That became a pattern. Every Christmas, every family retreat, I showed up. I smiled. I wore the dress Vivian wouldn't frown at. I brought hostess gifts. I knew where the extra candles were stored, which guest liked which wine. I reminded Lauren's kids not to run near the glass staircase. I made sure the kitchen had non-dairy options for Aunt Janine. I even once reprinted the entire seating chart overnight after Troy's girlfriend broke up with him and they didn't want to sit together. But none of it had my name on it. At one point, Vivian actually introduced me at brunch as our Odessa. So good with details. Like I was an executive assistant they forgot to pay. And I told myself it didn't matter, that I was doing it for Henry. That love sometimes means playing the long game. That silence is grace. But grace, I've learned, can turn into resentment when no one notices you're bleeding. Henry never meant harm, But he never saw the harm either. He'd compliment my patience like it was a virtue, not a survival tactic. When I once asked if he'd noticed how his mother always called me the sensible one, he replied, "Well, you are." I don't think he realized how many nights I cried quietly in hotel bathrooms while they toasted each other in the next room. How many family photos I took but never appeared in. The shift happened 2 summers ago. It was a night like any other. Long table under string lights, clinking glasses, roasted lamb, and someone bragging about Tesla stock. I was carrying a tray of coffee cups because someone had asked, and no one else stood up. When Henry's Uncle Troy looked at me and said, "She's surprisingly handy for someone who didn't grow up with staff." Everyone chuckled, even Henry. And I smiled, tight, quiet, deadly. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. I walked back to the guest house we'd been assigned and opened my laptop. Reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in 4 years, a colleague from a public-private rail project who'd since moved into boutique hotel investments. By the end of that week, we were discussing properties. By the end of the month, we were drafting options. And by the next spring, I had controlling interest in the Hadleys' favorite resort. They never asked where I was traveling. They never asked why I was on so many late-night calls. They never wondered why I was no longer trying, because they never thought to. By the time we returned to the resort the following summer, everything had already changed. The Hadleys just didn't know it yet. They arrived like they always did, Vivian in pearls and a scarf, even though it was 82 degrees, Lauren in head-to-toe linen, dragging 2 overstuffed Louis Vuitton duffels, like we didn't have staff for that. Henry, ever the bridge, smiled nervously and handed out compliments like olive branches. I walked behind them, same neutral dress, same soft voice, same pace. It was part habit, part strategy. If they didn't notice I was different, the reveal would be sharper. Inside, they immediately began noticing changes. New concierge uniforms, updated art in the lobby, a sleeker, more modern check-in system. Vivian wrinkled her nose and said the place had lost its character. Lauren called it corporate. I nodded along. The thing is, the old management let things slide for years. Mold in the guest house vents, outdated employee housing, a security system so ancient it couldn't even register ID mismatches. I'd spent the last 6 months quietly fixing all of it. Not because I needed their approval, but because I was building something I could respect. And yet, they still sat around the fire pit on the first night complaining. "I miss when it felt personal," Lauren said, sipping a glass of complimentary rosé. "Now it's like Marriott with better landscaping." Henry, bless him, agreed. "It does feel colder this year." I said nothing, just watched. Because beneath the pine-scented air and polished furniture, the Hadleys didn't want quality. They wanted familiarity. They wanted to feel above it. And when the place started holding them to the same standards as every other guest, they felt the sting of equality. I started to feel it too. Not pain, not guilt. Something cleaner, like truth. That week, I kept up appearances. Smiled when Lauren asked for extra towels like I worked there. Nodded when Uncle Troy asked if I'd mind checking on the wine fridge in the guest house. I didn't correct anyone. I let them show themselves. Henry, of course, didn't notice. He was buried in a book on frontier mythology, occasionally looking up to ask why I was always disappearing in the evenings. "I'm walking," I told him. He nodded, like that explained everything. And I did walk, but not to clear my head. Every night after dinner, I walked the property with a clipboard in one hand and renovation plans in the other. I reviewed equipment logs, checked lighting sensors, noted landscaping flaws, met quietly with Ethan to finalize the upcoming expansion rollout. He was the only one who knew the truth, and he never once questioned it. He saw me, not as Henry's wife, but as his boss. Sometimes, on those late-night rounds, I'd catch a glimpse of myself in the reflection of a glass door. Same face, same outline, but different, calmer, sharper, like someone slowly growing into a shape they were always meant to be. The contrast at home was harder to ignore. Henry had no idea, no questions, no curiosity. He never wondered why I kept a second phone for travel. Never asked why my emails sometimes came from a domain he didn't recognize. The man who taught seminars on subtext and narrative had missed the entire plot of our marriage. He didn't mean to, but neglect doesn't need bad intent. It just needs time and silence and someone willing to disappear a little each day to keep the peace. By the time the welcome dinner arrived, I'd made my decision. Originally, I was going to wait until the ownership summit later that month to reveal my name. But something about that evening made me change my mind. Maybe it was Lauren loudly criticizing the new pool chairs. Maybe it was Uncle Troy saying he missed the days when hospitality meant knowing who mattered. Or maybe it was Vivian's voice, sugary and slow, as she lifted her wine glass and said, "I hope whoever bought this place understands how much of its charm comes from families like ours. We built this tradition." That did it. After dessert, I slipped away from the long table and stepped out into the night. The air smelled like pine and self-delusion. I looked up at the stars, bright and unbothered, and called Ethan. "Tonight," I said. "Do it before anyone leaves." "You sure?" he asked. "You don't want to be in the room?" "No," I said calmly. "I want them to hear it without me. Let it land first." And so we did. 10 minutes later, as the dining room quieted and the lights dimmed for announcements, Ethan stood, tapped his glass, and shared the update. A new majority owner, new leadership, a fresh vision. And then he said my name, Odessa Wren. I walked in slowly as the room fell silent. Vivian froze mid-sip. Lauren's fork slipped off her plate. Henry turned his head like he'd seen a ghost, and I smiled, just enough to show teeth. No one clapped. Not at first, just silence, thick and prickly, like the moment before a glass shatters. I walked past the stunned faces, heels clicking on hardwood, and stood beside Ethan. "Thank you," I said into the mic, looking out at the family who'd never truly seen me. "You're all still welcome here, just like everyone else now." That was all. No speeches, no gloating. I didn't need to. I handed the mic back and walked out before anyone had the sense to fake applause. The hallway outside was cold and quiet. I exhaled slowly, feeling something uncoil in my chest. Not victory, not even satisfaction. Something older. Something like relief. I'd stopped playing the role, and I wasn't going back. Behind me, the room stayed still. A few chairs scraped against the floor. Someone dropped a spoon. A quiet gasp. The sort of hush you only get when no one's sure if they've just witnessed something brilliant or devastating. The next morning, I skipped brunch. Let them gather without me. Let the questions stew. Instead, I walked the property with Ethan, clipboard in hand, double-checking the new solar grid installation and dock renovation schedule. Staff nodded respectfully. Guests smiled, not out of obligation, but from genuine ease. It was the first time I felt the weight of authority without apology, and it didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. By noon, my phone lit up with the first message. "Lauren, hey, can we talk?" I didn't answer. 15 minutes later, a knock on my suite door. Henry. He looked pale, almost small. His hands were in his pockets, something he only did when he didn't know what to say. "Nessa," he started, using a nickname from a different lifetime. Are you okay?" I stared at him. This man I'd loved, waited for, protected, even when he didn't do the same. "You never asked," I said quietly. "Asked what?" "What I do, where I go, why I've been on so many flights. You never once asked." He blinked, slow and unsure. "I didn't think I needed to." I shook my head. "That's exactly the problem, Henry. You never thought it was worth knowing." He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He looked like someone who'd just realized they were standing in a house without walls. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just let the silence stretch until he turned and left, slowly, like someone drifting backward through fog. Later that evening, at the Legacy Guest Cocktail Hour, an event I'd originally considered canceling, I showed up in navy silk and heels, exactly the kind Vivian once called a bit ambitious for someone with my background. The room hushed as I entered. Glasses tilted mid-sip. Someone dropped a phone. I caught Vivian staring before she looked away and adjusted her brooch like that would reset the mood. I waited until they were halfway through a toast before stepping to the mic. Some of you already know me. Some of you thought you did. Nervous chuckles, scattered whispers. I clicked the slide remote. Behind me, the screen lit up. A detailed rendering of the resort's future expansion. Wellness center, sustainable cabins, lakeside learning spaces. The kind of things they would have called idealistic just a year ago. All of this will be funded by a new initiative, I said. The Wren Women's Fund, named after my mother, June Wren, who cleaned motel rooms in Billings for 16 years and raised me with nothing but grit, grace, and steel in her spine. I turned to Vivian and held her gaze. She taught me that respect is earned, not inherited. Her smile flickered, cracked. I clicked the next slide. Starting next season, we'll be reviewing all private lease arrangements, especially those dating back prior to the new ownership. The room stilled. They knew. Lauren's cabin? Leased through her husband's company, sublet under the table for years. Uncle Troy's lakefront duplex? Held on an expired agreement never properly renewed. I didn't have to name names. The air tightened with recognition. Of course, I added calmly. Anyone is welcome to reapply. Standard rates, no exceptions. I thanked them and stepped down. Marcus Hadley caught my arm on the way out. Odessa, come on. Surely we can talk. I smiled. Absolutely. Feel free to schedule a meeting through guest services, like everyone else. 3 days later, I sat alone at the edge of the dock, barefoot, coffee in hand, watching the lake hold its breath between sunrise and stillness. It was the first time in years I felt like the water mirrored me. Quiet, steady, undisturbed. But the resort itself? It wasn't quiet anymore. By noon, my inbox had become a war zone. Lauren sent a voice memo, using the word misunderstanding 5 separate times. Troy emailed asking if we could grandfather in his legacy rights, just this once. Ethan forwarded me an inquiry from someone in Vivian's circle, trying to discuss options privately. And then came the voicemail. Vivian, in her most performative calm. Odessa, dear, I think this has all gotten a bit dramatic, don't you? We're family. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Woman to woman, surely we can work something out. The same woman who once asked, at Thanksgiving dinner, if I'd considered taking a posture class because engineers tend to slouch. I didn't reply. Instead, I asked legal to review every lease file. Lauren had been profiting off illegal subletting for years, over $45,000 unreported. We didn't sue. We just notified the state tax board and let them handle the audit. I forwarded her a contact for a reputable CPA. Uncle Troy's expired lease? I gave him 30 days' notice and reassigned the space to a nonprofit for disabled veterans. Their families moved in before July. As for Vivian, she came in person, pearls, gloves, a small box of scones she didn't bake. She sat across from me in my office, trying to spin it like reputation management, public image, poor Henry, and didn't I want to be the bigger person? I listened for 5 minutes. Then I slid the manila envelope across the desk. Inside, documentation of 3 complaints from former staff. Housekeepers and interns Vivian had belittled, threatened, even cornered in hallways. I'd quietly settled each case after acquisition, but now I made the terms clear. If she ever attempted to frame herself as the victim in public, the NDA clause would dissolve. This wasn't revenge. This was insurance. She left in silence, not a single word. Henry never fought me, not once. But he unraveled in the weeks that followed. His identity shaken, his assumptions exposed. We had long, raw conversations. There were moments I almost reached for him, almost softened. But in the end, I said something I hadn't admitted until that moment. I didn't marry into your family to be accepted. I stayed because I thought one day you'd see me, really see me. But I don't need that anymore, because now, I see myself. He moved out a month later, no screaming, no scenes, just space and peace. Sometimes closure isn't an apology. Sometimes it's not even recognition. Sometimes closure is knowing you were right all along, and no one can take that away. I still walk the property every morning, still carry a clipboard, still know where the extra candles are stored. But now, when someone assumes I work here, I just smile and say, I do. And when they ask what I do exactly, I say, everything that matters.